Jessica Cochelone. I'm the executive director of the Shenandoah National Park Trust. And our mission is to make strategic investments in park programs and initiatives that protect, enhance, and preserve the national park, Shenandoah National Park, for today and tomorrow's supporters. Tonight we put this program together on about bears because who doesn't love bears? We all love bears. They're so cute. But we also know that bears are entering our habitats at our greater numbers, or more like we're entering their habitats at greater numbers. Let's put it that way, and that puts them at risk. The trust is very proud to we invest in a lot of things in the park, but one of the programs that we invest in is about keeping our bears healthy and safe and wild, and this comes in a variety of ways, including bear boxes. We fund bear boxes at campgrounds and other high density areas. We also fund education initiatives around educating the public around how to keep bears, which Rolf is going to talk more about. And in the season, we fund two bear techs that will go around and help educate campers and visitors around bear safety, mainly not feeding the bears. As you'll learn, they like human foods. The other thing is bears are definitely beloved, and I particularly, when I'm out talking to the community, have gotten a lot of questions and comments and just wondering about our bear population, not just in the park, but through these conversations, you start realizing that this really is a regional issue, that bears really know no boundaries. And so we thought it was important to bring not only the park in to talk about what they're doing, but also our partners, Katherine and Ed and their organizations, to have a better sort of understanding of what we're all doing to try to keep our bears healthy. And so I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Rolf, and Ed and Katherine will be introduced to you as the program gets moved along. But Rolf Gubler has worked with the National Park Service for over 34 years, serving in a variety of roles and focusing largely on natural resource management. Rolf is a frequent collaborator with the Trust, overseeing many Trust-funded programs. Currently, Rolf manages the Forest Insect and Disease Program and oversees birds, black bears, and white-tailed deer at Shenandoah. So thank you, Rolf, for joining us, and I'll let you take over.
Okay, so I'm going to talk today about keeping our bears and humans safe in Shenandoah National Park. And just a very quick refresher on black bears and also a little bit about Shenandoah National Park's bears. Black bears are the largest mammal in SNP in Shenandoah National Park. They have 2 to 4 young per year. Males have larger home ranges, roughly 50, 60, 70 miles. Females have shorter or smaller home ranges, roughly 10, 20 square miles. Black bears are typically shy around humans, but they're very intelligent. They're highly omnivorous. Their diet consists of about 85% plant material. We have about 300 to 500 bears in the park, but this really varies over time and by season. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit and talk about a recent trend. We average about 70 nuisance bear incidents per year. Those are things like bear jams. We'll talk about what that means, food rewards. They have a remarkable sense of smell, and they're highly opportunistic, and that often gets them in trouble, especially as it relates to unsecured food and trash in our park. And of course, bears are one of the main reasons why people visit the park. So that recent population trend I wanted to talk to you about. So in 2020 and 2021, the park saw fewer bear sightings. We had fewer nuisance events. We had fewer motor vehicle bear collisions. And possible causes of this could be sarcoptic mange, increased harvest pressure, and other factors like food availability. But in 2022, we saw an uptick in bear sightings. And we also saw some positive results from a recent wildlife camera study from portions of the North District and Central District. And we're seeing in 2022, or we have seen, fewer bears with clinical signs of mange. So that's good. And I think Katie's going to talk a little bit more about mange later on. And we can sort of address that in some of the Q&A. Most mange cases are now being seen southwest of the Shenandoah National Park, and we're likely moving out of that 3 to 5 year mange disease cycle. So that's good news for us. Before we get into our program, our human bear interactions program, I just want to tell you a little bit about our management policies and guidelines that sort of guide us in national parks, and specifically Shenandoah. So as a national park, we let natural processes prevail. We don't allow hunting. We rarely manage habitat, although we sometimes manage habitat by default. Areas like the Big Meadow or the Skyline Drive corridor, we inadvertently manage habitat and create good habitat for bear and deer, for example. We minimize the amount of active management on wildlife. We don't intervene in cases of native wildlife diseases. So we're different than the U.S. Forest Service, and we're different than the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, for example. So we're going to talk next about our multifaceted human-bear interactions program. And we're going to cover our messaging, our proactive messaging, our in-person contacts. We're going to talk about conducting active management and what that means, examples of that. And we're going to talk about aversive conditioning, what that means, and how and when we use it. And we all do these things to keep our bears safe, but also to improve visitor safety. So some of the most important things we can do to get the word out to people and do that proactive messaging is to have in-person contacts. And we do that at campgrounds, and we do that with our campground rangers, actively talking with the brand new campers coming in, talking about food storage regulations, talking about wildlife viewing distances, making sure they dispose of trash properly. And they have to adhere to these things and mark off and check that they read and understood. But we also use sort of targeted signage in a place and time. For example, this picnic table sign is very cool. It's designed so when you put your food down and you do your picnicking, you're immediately sort of jogged and reminded that, hey, I need to store my food properly. If I'm going to go for a hike, I need to store my food back in the vehicle. So I think they're really interesting signs and have sort of a low profile. You don't notice that they're signs when you're driving around the picnic area. I think they're really, really useful. And then we have standard posters and things like that that really focus on our main message points: storing your food properly, disposing of trash, don't feed wildlife, and respect buffer zones, buffers when you're viewing wildlife. We also use preventive and proactive messaging with social media, with Facebook, with Twitter, things like that. And again, we're getting those messages out, those same messages about food storage and trash management, things like that. But we're also talking about wildlife vehicle collisions. And we do hotspot mapping, and we map where deer and bear are getting hit by cars. So we provide those hotspot maps to visitors so we can really help inform them, and it sort of helps them really key into areas where they need to be more alert when they're driving on Skyline Drive. We use sort of some of these clever signage type things when we try to make it easier for visitors to understand just how far away is 50 yards or 150 feet. So we do this by saying, okay, you need to respect the viewing distance and the buffer that we need to give black bears, and that's 4 bus lengths. So I think these are pretty clever, and I think they resonate well with visitors. And of course, we have safety messaging that we'll put out. If we have a backcountry campsite where a bear has gotten a food reward, we put out this type of safety messaging, and it tells and gives advice to visitors what to do if you encounter a bear, for example, or a persistent bear. Talks about, you shouldn't run, you need to make noise, flapping, throwing rocks may scare the bear away, and other things like that. So active management includes things like this. So when we're in a campground and our wildlife techs, which are partially funded by or primarily funded by the SNPT, when our techs come up, or our campground rangers come up on a site like this, a campsite like this, where there's food that's not properly stored, even though there's a food storage locker, our technicians will come in, or our campground rangers, or our law enforcement rangers will actually impound this food and secure it properly, and then impound the unsecured trash. That's what that looks like. Because we don't want to have an animal, a bear, get a food reward, because that really puts that animal at risk. Because that animal then will have to be captured and relocated up to 50 miles away. And when that happens, that animal is at greater risk of being legally harvested off park or being struck by a vehicle, for example. Some additional active management that we do, we use aversive conditioning, a type of hazing. We'll use noisemaker rounds, and we'll use paintball rounds to move habituated or food tolerant animals out of the campground. This is a common thing that we'll do. It works really well, and it establishes a no trespass zone. So that animal knows that the campground is off limits, but the backcountry area just off to the left here, that's fine. But we use this quite often in campgrounds, picnic areas, and sometimes around lodges. We also manage bear jams, and a bear jam is basically an animal that creates a traffic jam on Skyline Drive. And with bears, you can have 10, 15 cars backed up. It's pretty common. We probably average about 50 to 100 per year. That's what it looks like. But this slide in particular sort of tells the story. Here's a sow with 2 cubs crossing Skyline Drive. And there's issues here, not just with the safety of the bear, but it's safety of the humans. And the humans here, there's 2 of them right in the roadway. The vehicles are off the road, but it's a sharp bend, and there's actually one visitor with their back turned to the bear. So that's pretty interesting. So talking quickly and briefly about some of the infrastructure that we've improved upon over the last 25 years. We're constantly trying to refine and improve our dumpsters, our wildlife resistant dumpsters, and our trash cans. So those are examples of this here. We've also been more strategic about where and how many we put at specific developed areas. So we've really fine-tuned and try to find that perfect mix. We don't want to put too many, and we also want to have dumpsters that are usable by people. They have to be wildlife resistant, but they have to be usable. And if a person can't reach a top door, that person's going to leave the trash on the ground. So it needs to be functional as well. These are food storage lockers that the trust has partially funded as well. And we have those at roughly half of our campsites in all our campgrounds, and we continue to put those up. And a little bit more about hotspot mapping. This is some hotspot mapping for bear vehicle collisions from 2016 to 2019. You can see where some of those hotspots are over Swift Run Gap, Big Meadows to Skyland, and over Thornton Gap, and also up at Dickey Ridge. So we use this and we inform our law enforcement rangers. It helps them to be able to run radar and do targeted patrols in certain areas where we have more bears and deer crossing the Skyline Drive. And we'll also use this to put up sort of targeted temporary signage and alert visitors to these areas where we have greater frequency of bears crossing the road. And these things do work, especially bear-related collision area signage. People will often overlook deer stuff, but when it's bears, they'll slow down. So as we wind down here, these are some things you can do to help. These are some things you can sort of convey to your neighbor and other park visitors. We really want to make sure that everyone knows that we can't have trash out overnight. So we do whatever it takes to make sure that doesn't happen. We want to make sure everybody just stores their food and disposes of their trash properly. And consider carrying a trash bag next time you come visit the park, especially if you're in campgrounds and picnic areas, and consider picking up loose trash and food scraps and things like that. And if you see a dumpster overflowing, please report it to a ranger right away. That goes back to the tenant, no overnight food, no food left out overnight, nothing unsecured. And always give bears a 50-yard buffer when viewing. Always keep your dog on a leash. And these are things you can convey to your neighbors and to other visitors. And especially dogs off leash near sows and cubs. And that's just really a bad mix. And if you do carry bear spray in the backcountry, know how to properly use it. There's plenty of good videos, and I can go direct with you if you need some videos, and I can set you up with that. And lastly, I just wanted to say thank you to the Shenandoah National Park Trust.
Rolf, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us this evening, and for your many years of service to the National Park Service and to our beloved Shenandoah. Tonight's theme and focus is that bears know no boundaries, and that makes it very important and very necessary for multiple entities across our state to keep Virginia's black bear population safe. So now we'll hear from our second guest, Katherine Martin from the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. Katherine holds an undergraduate and a master's degree in wildlife science and forestry from Virginia Tech. She's worked as a biologist for Virginia Tech, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and most recently, the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. She is currently their statewide deer, bear, turkey biologist, which I think is the coolest title that I have ever heard. So take it away, Katie.
All right, thank you all so much. I take it you can see the screen fine. All right. Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for having me tonight. I was really excited to be able to come and speak with you all tonight. A little bit about kind of the statewide perspective on black bears. So first, just if you're not familiar with us at the Department of Wildlife Resources, I just wanted to show you a little bit about who we are, or tell you who we are with our mission statement. So our really three big focus areas are to conserve, connect, and protect. So we want to conserve wildlife resources for now and into future generations. We want to connect people with the outdoors and the wildlife that are here in Virginia. And of course, protect with our conservation police officers and our biologists that work with folks on human wildlife conflict. So really, it's just kind of a threefold mission statement to get people into the outdoors, introduce them to the wildlife that we have. We're very blessed here in Virginia with a wide range of wildlife resources. So as we talk about bears in Virginia, we have quite a healthy bear population all across the state. So we're really lucky to have these bears here in Virginia, and especially around Shenandoah National Park, but all across the state. So one interesting thing is that black bears here in Virginia are actually part of one of the largest contiguous bear populations in the Southeast. So all the way from Florida up through Virginia, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And then as you continue on north up to Canada, you will find black bears, especially in the mountainous regions. Now in Virginia, you'll actually find black bears really all across the state, so not even just in the mountains. And so black bears are kind of considered one of these great success stories of conservation, because just 100 years ago, you would not have found bears all across the state of Virginia. There were small pockets of bears, over in our western mountains and over in the Dismal Swamp. But it's really thanks to the conservation efforts of places like Shenandoah National Park and our national forest that we now have black bears statewide. So where can you find bears in Virginia? Currently, really any county in the state of Virginia, you're likely to see a bear, with a higher probability probably in our western mountains and in the Piedmont area. So as you go further to the east, especially kind of that northern neck or the eastern shore area, little less likely to see bears. But around our western mountains, where you see these dark green patches on the map, that's where we have pretty high bear densities in the state. And then we've got expanding populations all the way out into the Piedmont area now of Virginia. So really healthy bear populations pretty well statewide. But if you look at the map, the darkest green areas are a little bit south of the park in kind of the Highland, Bath, Allegheny region, and then far southeast over at Great Dismal Swamp. So those are our two highest densities of bears, but still healthy populations there near the park as well. So as Rolf mentioned in his talk, we do have some issues that are facing black bears, and this is kind of new. Bears were always thought to be pretty resilient animals and not susceptible to a lot of things out there on the landscape. But in the last few years, we have had a pretty extreme outbreak of sarcoptic mange across our landscape. So I know the map is probably a little bit hard to see on your screen, but basically that just shows that we started getting these reports of sarcoptic mange in black bears up in our most northwestern county, Frederick County, Virginia, back in around 2014. And since then, up through 2022, the number of reports have really increased and they've spread south and eastward. So in the last year, most of our reports have been more in the Augusta, Nelson County, Albemarle area, while early during this outbreak back in 2017-18, they were kind of focused more north near the park area. So mange is a highly contagious skin disease that any mammal species can get. And while it was always common to hear about foxes or coyotes with mange, we never heard much about bears with mange until really about those around 2014. We started getting a few reports of this. And as I said, since then, unfortunately, it has kind of spread south and eastward, and we average right now about 125 confirmed reports every year. That's probably a very low number. There's probably more out there on the landscape that just a person hasn't seen to report it. So those clinical signs of mange is intense itching. You've got this little mite that burrows into the skin, so it causes really intense itching for the animal, then hair loss and some thickened and dry, crusty skin. And unfortunately, then if it progresses to a later stage, those animals will become emaciated and often have some altered behaviors. They just kind of lose that fear of being around people, honestly, because they're just kind of miserable at that stage with having to deal with those mites. So that is an issue we have on the landscape, and we're trying to do some more research and learn more about it so that we can hopefully protect our bears from this in the future. So as you saw the map of where we have bears in Virginia, where we have a lot of bears might mean then we also get a lot of calls from people about bears. So bears, as Rolf mentioned, are very smart, very curious animals, and sometimes that can cause them to get into a little bit of trouble when they're around human development. Now, one thing to note, if you see the dark pink to orange colors are our highest calls about black bears. And these are classified as conflict calls. We have a wildlife helpline where people can call in about numerous types of wildlife and just ask questions to how to better deal with wildlife in their backyard. But a conflict for one person may not be the same for someone else. So some of these calls are simply just somebody sees a black bear in their yard and they're calling to report about it. Others are things that, well, maybe the bear is actually calling a conflict for them. So some of the things that bears get into a bit of trouble about here in the state are primarily trash. So as Rolf alluded to at the park, keeping your trash secure is a really big part of the management. And it's not just in the park, that is statewide. So of course, we're people, we create a lot of trash in our daily life, but we need to keep that secured and cleaned up because bears love it. They make a big mess and they like to get into that trash. So trash is our number one complaint call when we look through all of the calls at the end of the year. And then right behind that are bird feeders. So as you can tell, this bear is he's really working hard to get some of that bird seed balancing on top of that bird feeder there. But it's a free, easy meal for a black bear to get a lot of calories in those bird feeders. So this is why a lot of times they'll come and use these areas. And then after that, it's a wide assortment of calls that we get, anything from just a basic sighting of a bear maybe trying to get into livestock feed, maybe causing a little bit of property damage by digging around in an area or trying to get into a chicken coop or something. So a wide range of calls, but trash and bird feeders always rank up there at the top each year. So for the Department of Wildlife Resources, our approach is really a lot of education and outreach. So we want to work with people to really increase your tolerance of being around black bears in Virginia. We have bears all across the state. We're really thankful to have these bears out there on the landscape. So we want to help you learn how you can live with bears. And so this can include some on-site assistance to help somebody find out what attractants maybe are bringing a bear close to their home, how to better secure them, the on-site aversive conditioning, just like Rolf mentioned in the park. We do the same thing out with landowners in your yard. Loud noises, using deterrents or things like electric fencing to keep bears out of areas you don't want them. And then the very last step would be actually having to capture the bear and humanely dispatch it. And again, this is a very last resort, very rarely used, and only occurs if a conflict has just gotten to a point where the bear is now fully food conditioned and human habituated and could cause a safety concern. So out statewide, we do not move bears or translocate bears because it doesn't solve the problem of the attractant that the bear came to. So we want to work with people to fix those attractants, secure those attractants, and not move a bear. Unfortunately, if we moved a bear, likely another bear would just fill in that void and still be causing a problem for you. Or the bear, they really know where home is and they're likely to move back and try to come back to where they came from and could unfortunately then get hit by a vehicle or hunted, likely to get hunted then as they move across the landscape. So we don't use translocation on a statewide basis for us, but we use a lot of education and on-site assistance. So how do you do your part then? So we are members of this organization called Bear Wise. And so we want to just drill it in that we want people to be bear wise. Not only do you know about bears and their basic biology, but you know how to take the steps to live with bears. And so number one, just removing or securing all these potential food sources that are out there on the landscape. Number two, of course, we don't want a bear to get too comfortable in your space. Just as Rolf mentioned at the campgrounds and the picnic areas, they want the bear to know that the backcountry is a good space. Right around the campground or the picnic area, not so much. And the same thing goes for your backyard. So you can use these deterrents and aversive conditioning to teach them those boundaries. Prevention is always better than trying to fix the problem at the end. And it's not just at home, you have to do these things at work and even when you're out recreating. So just a few simple steps. We've got the Bear-wise basics, and the big one here is just really, again, that food, those trash containers. Securing those in some type of a bear-resistant storage caddy or keeping them in a locked shed or building can go a long way to preventing a problem. Bird feeders, again, since that's the big one, the easiest step there, just take those things down from April through December. And I know I'm a bird lover. I like to watch the birds. So you can plant native plants that are seed producing or produce nectar that can do the same thing, but not draw a bear right in there to make a mess and get all that bird seed. And then pet food is a big one that we often don't think about. If you feed your pets outdoors, you also need to clean up the pet food so the bear's not sitting there getting an easy meal from your pet food. So those are some easy steps you can take at home. And then, of course, probably if you're here listening to this presentation, you're interested in the outdoors and recreating. So while you're hiking or camping or out in the backcountry, you can do a lot to stay safe out there and be bear wise by being very aware of your surroundings. So always know what's around you, know where you are, make some noises when you're out hiking or camping by yourself. And then if you carry bear spray, as Rolf mentioned, please know how to use it. Keep it on your hip and know how to use it by watching some of those safety videos. When you're camping, again, the big one, securing that food. So use those food storage lockers that are provided. Keep your food in a vehicle if you don't have an option to use one of those lockers, because you don't want the bear with his head in your cooler getting in trouble. When the bear gets in trouble, that unfortunately then leads to that bear to learn about getting a food reward. And then the big one, is Rolf mentioned as well, keeping those pets on a leash. So we don't want a pet that is out there harassing a bear, chasing after a bear, or barking at them and getting them upset. So these are just some simple tips you can take while you're outdoors recreating, and the same thing at home. And so this is just a little bit more information, some websites you can visit. The Bear-wise website is fantastic. It has those tip sheets available to print out and take with you. Our webpage has a little bit of information about bears on our bear page. And then the book Living with Bears is just a book I always recommend for folks that are interested in bears. It's a fantastic resource. And with that, just thank you all. And I know we'll do some Q&A at the end. So thank you very much.
Katie, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I learned a lot. We are grateful to you for being here and teaching us these really important concepts.
Sure.
And now we are going to welcome our final guest, Ed Clark, who is the co-founder and president of the Wildlife Center of Virginia, one of the world's leading hospitals for wildlife. Since 1982, they've treated more than 90,000 patients, presented over 2 million educational programs, and trained veterinary and conservation professionals from more than 40 countries around the world. Welcome, Ed, and thank you so much for being here this evening.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Good. Yeah. I must be the Luddite among our presenters, because as Emily, our tech guru, knows, for some reason I've had more technological challenges getting to join you all this evening, but I'm so honored and so pleased to be here. Rolf and I made a little conversation before we started. He's been around the park almost as long as the Wildlife Center of Virginia has been around, and we've met over the years and variety of meetings. And of course, Katie Martin is one of our closest friends and collaborators, and it really is. It's an honor to be here. The very first black bear I ever saw was in Shenandoah National Park when I was about 16 years old, which, as you can see, has been a very long time ago. And we were in a campground at Big Meadows, and we didn't have food in our tents, but we were camped next to a bunch of Boy Scouts who had a lot of food in their tents, and it proved to be a fairly animated evening. So my relationship with Shenandoah National Park goes back to the time when in 1964, I moved to downtown Flint Hill, Virginia, which is in Rappahannock County, which is where I grew up, and have lived within the shadow of Shenandoah for a long, long time on the east side of the mountain, and for the last 40 years or 45 years on the west side of the mountain in Augusta County. So Jessica and I have been friends since she first came on the job, and it's really, really great to be here. Now, I guess I'm going to kind of pile on to some of the things that have already been said, in the sense that a lot of the issues that are issues in the park, a lot of the issues that are issues for bears statewide are issues specifically for the Wildlife Center of Virginia. And I am going to try to share my screen here. The Wildlife Center of Virginia is a hospital for native wild animals, and we've been around for a long time, but our mission is not fixing broken animals. Our mission is teaching. And we're a lot of things to a lot of different people. We were established in 1982. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary in November of last year. We're the world's leading teaching and research hospital for wildlife and conservation medicine. We've got a long partnership with Shenandoah National Park, particularly in public education programming, because working with the park 35 years ago or so, we created the Raptor Education Program. And about 30 years ago, we welcomed into that a brand new, shiny, untested naturalist who then spent the next 30 years doing raptor education in Shenandoah National Park. And she recently retired after 30 years of doing this. And of course, our relationship with the Department of Wildlife Resources is indeed a very long and intricate relationship covering many, many aspects of conservation and public policy. Now, this is what the Wildlife Center of Virginia looks like right now. We are located in Waynesboro, Virginia, where we've been located since 1995. This building is about, let's call it 6,000 square feet, but we are, it has not been publicly announced, so you're getting in on an advanced notification. We are going to be expanding this facility threefold. We are adding a 14,000 square foot addition to this building. We've received 100,000 wild patients of 350 species from all parts of Virginia. And we are a teaching hospital. So we get students and professionals from all over the world. So the issue for the Wildlife Center of Virginia is one of how do we indeed use the individual cases that come to our door as a means through which we can understand and really do more to help wildlife. Now, as I say, we've treated a lot of animals, but we're different. We are not just there to fix broken animals. We've treated nearly 100,000 animals, as I say, 350 species. We get people from all over the world. We work all over the world with wildlife and veterinary professionals. And when we find something new or novel or special, we publish it in peer-reviewed journals. We are a scientific organization. And while most people think of us as the place that fixes broken animals and cares for orphans, our mission is indeed teaching. And a lot of you in the Shenandoah National Park Trust area may know us from our public television program, Untamed, which is an Emmy-nominated series that has been on for 4 years. And in fact, the very first episode of that series was about black bears. Now, what makes us different is we use the care of individual animals as a way to identify problems in the environment that may be affecting entire populations. We may be looking at an individual animal that comes in with an environmental toxin, that comes in with a disease manifestation, or some, frankly, illegal activity impact that has an impact on all of the animals in that species or all of the animals in that region. We use the cases that we have before us, the individual animals that come to us, as real life examples of what these environmental problems mean, of how these problems, whether it's human behavior or carelessness with our trash or our bird feeders or our behavior when we visit public lands and recreational areas, we translate that into the real life impact that affects wildlife. And the Wildlife Center of Virginia is the world's leading teaching and research hospital for wildlife medicine. Black bears are wildlife. When they get hurt, they come to us. The Wildlife Center of Virginia is the only facility in Virginia authorized to provide veterinary and rehabilitative care to black bears. This slide shows the locations from which we have received black bears in the last, actually it's 12 and a half years, 13 years we'll say, since 2010. And as you can see, the heavy preponderance of black bears coming to the center is from an area that is close to Shenandoah National Park. Black bears come into us for many reasons. Most have been orphaned as cubs or separated from their mothers. Some cubs have been held in illegal captivity, and some cubs and adults have been hit by cars or trucks. But as both of our previous speakers have mentioned, many are now suffering from mange, and that's a huge issue. For orphan bears, when we get them in, and that is probably about 80% of the bears that come to the Wildlife Center, we do everything we can to emulate natural processes. Now, so in the wild, a bear cub will be cared for by its mother and will stay with its mother until it's about 15 months old, which means that they stay for more than 1 year. In Virginia, the average date on which bears are born is January 17th, and they become yearlings in January and adolescents in April. And like every other adolescent in the world, when they become teenagers, they no longer want to be seen with their parents, which certainly works out because the mother is coming back into estrus or into heat. The new male is interested in breeding. He does not want to be concerned with somebody else's offspring. So the babies are off on their own. In our habitats, we provide as much natural cover, natural food sources as possible. We have people all across Virginia collecting things like acorns for us. And as mentioned earlier, they stay with us for 15 months, at which point they will then be picked up by Katie and her colleagues from the Department of Wildlife Resources and released into the wild into appropriate areas. So the illegal captivity issue with which we deal is really a far more complex issue because bears are so intelligent, they're so adept at learning new things, and they lose their fear of humans very, very quickly when they are rewarded with friendly, receptive behavior, when they're rewarded with food. And once those behaviors have become imprinted on their little bear brains, it's very difficult to correct them. And habituation to humans, as both of our previous speakers have mentioned, becomes fatal. There's a saying among those of us who work with bears that a fed bear is a dead bear. And as much as we hate to admit it, that's the truth. Injured bears are treated when possible. Obviously, it's a lot easier to treat a 15-pound cub than a 150 or a 250-pound adult. But when any of these bears are treated for injuries like broken bones from automobile collisions, they're kept in isolation. They are fed as closely as natural as possible to their natural diet. And if any drugs are used, we have to be mindful that when this bear is released, this animal is potentially hunted. And when hunted and harvested, they are typically eaten, which means that we have to treat all of our bears the same way that a farmer would consider a cow or a pig or a chicken. In administering drugs, we have to consider the drug withdrawal time, so that when that animal is eaten, there is no residue of that drug that could affect a human who is subsequently consuming the meat of that animal. Our goal is that any of the animals come out and are able to behave normally and naturally. Survival alone is not adequate. We do not release animals that are missing limbs. We do not release certain animals that have compromised vision. Even though in the wild those animals might survive, that's not what we're in the business of creating. Now, sarcoptic mange was mentioned a moment ago. I hope you're seeing the picture of this. It's a very serious issue in the mid-Atlantic states. We are seeing it heavily in Pennsylvania. We are seeing it heavily in Virginia over the last 6 or 8 years. As Katie mentioned, the sarcoptic mange mite burrows into the skin. It does not take blood meals, but feeds on the lymphatic fluids. Other species that are typically affected when we think of mange include foxes, dogs, coyotes, raccoons, and even humans can get mange. But the good news is it's relatively easy to treat for domestic and companion animals. But for wild animals, the problem is that the drug that's been used for many, many years to treat this in dogs and humans, ivermectin, requires 2 doses to be given 30 days apart, which means you have to have that animal in captivity. Now, the Wildlife Center of Virginia is the only facility in Virginia able to house bears for a long time, but the number of cases or the number of incidents being called into the department far exceeds our capability to treat and the department's capability to capture and bring in for treatment. But for 3 years, the Wildlife Center of Virginia conducted a very in-depth and very sophisticated research project looking for a new family of drugs so that these animals could be treated with 1 dose of medication. And we indeed did succeed in finding a way to treat mange. Now, the pictures you see on the right-hand side here, that's the before and after pictures of the exact same bear. This bear was treated with a new family of drugs called Fluoroliner. It's sold actually very commonly for the care of our dogs. The trade name is Brovecto. For the treatment of external and internal parasites. We had a 100% cure rate for mange. The upper picture and the lower picture are about 90 days apart to give you an idea of what a dramatic response we had. Now, but again, because bears are food animals, we had to do what is known as pharmacokinetic studies. How long does it take for this drug to leave the bear's body? And indeed, we were able to confirm after testing more than 20 bears that the drug was completely gone in about 6 weeks' time, which was great. So we start from hunting season and work backwards 6 weeks, and that is the last date at which this drug can be administered for the treatment of this disease. And everything looked great. The results were dramatic. The bear that you saw previously on intake had lost probably 50% of its hair. This is what she looked like about probably about 90 days later. And then eventually she hibernated, came out and emerged. She had a collar on, and we loaded up the woods around her with game cameras. And so this was about a year after she came in initially infected. And as you can see, the results were pretty dramatic. Now, unfortunately, the things you don't see coming can knock you out of the game. We had 100% success treating this infection. We released these bears. They appeared to behave normally, do all the things that bears are supposed to do. But we had 4 bears in Pennsylvania and Virginia that became reinfected. And the second time the infections came through, they ended up being far worse than the first time. We don't know why. We wonder if it was an allergic reaction, an allergic sensitivity caused by the first infection, an immune response because of the first infection, a histamine reaction like many humans have that creates hives, as an example, is something that causes this allergy. We just don't know. But what we do know is that it's no longer humane for us to treat bears that have greater than 50% hair loss, because we make them vulnerable to this second infection that is just far more devastating. We believe there's a genetic factor. We just don't know. So more research is needed. We need to determine what genetic factors may be out there. We need to look for differences in mites affecting bears and dogs, as an example, or foxes or coyotes. There's some work going on that, but a lot more needs to be done. We need to be looking at the effects of things like climate change. We are not getting severe winters here in Virginia, in Shenandoah National Park, like we used to get. And above all, we need to look for ways to reduce the impact of that second infection. Now, to leave you on a happier note, I'm sorry that it's such a downer to end with, but we all care so much about our bears. I want to invite you to come to the Wildlife Center's website, because having treated over 200 bears in the last 12 or 13 years, we have them around all the time. And one of the things we have is our critter cams. And I will warn you in advance, if you begin watching bear cubs on critter cam, it's habit forming. It can be counterproductive to your professional and personal life, and it's certainly going to damage your productivity. But in any case, it's been an honor to be here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And thanks to my colleagues, Rolf and Katie, for their wonderful contributions.
Well, Ed, thank you for everything that you and the Wildlife Center do. And I learned a lot from you today and the mission of your organization. And we're really glad you were here. And Rolf and Katie and Ed, we've gotten some really cool questions in the chat. We won't be able to get to all of them, but I will ask a couple that came in. And let me start with, for maybe Rolf and Katie, what have you learned? What have your organizations learned? Are there any studies that show what messaging is the most effective at educating people and preventing them from endangering bears? Some of you mentioned social media, signage. What would you say maybe each of you has been the top most successful home runs?
I can start, Katie. In-person interactions are really great, but we all know we can't afford to do those in most situations. Preventive and proactive messaging on websites and on social media is really good, but it needs to be dynamic, and it needs to show sort of timely and relevant information like hotspot mapping, or how you can change your behavior and how it sort of resonates with people, how you can get people to change your behavior that way. And I'll say a couple other things. You want to, in the case of strategic signs, you want to provide succinct information. And if they're those picnic table signs, for example, you want them to be very succinct, and they're given a strategic time and place to serve as an effective reminder at thwarting that non-compliant visitor behavior. So it's different things we've learned over the years. There is research. There's one research study I can remember with some human wildlife interactions work, was Hockett et al. And that research talked about how they had better visitor compliance, and they got people to feed fewer deer, feed deer less at Big Meadows Campground, Big Meadows Picnic Ground, when they used a wildlife health appeal versus a human fear appeal. So there's just a few tidbits for you. So instead of saying, "Oh, you're going to get fined and you're going to get in trouble," this is what happens to the deer's digestive system. This is what's going to happen to the animal in the winter, or what happens to that bear, and makes it susceptible to whatever. So there are some things, and there is research, but there's a lot of work to be done as it relates to the efficacy of messaging with human-wildlife interactions. There's a lot to be done.
Thanks, Rolf. What about you, Katie?
Yeah, echo a lot of what Rolf said, and really it's just trying to create these really clear, succinct visuals. People like to see a picture, see something that grabs their attention to then get them to focus and read it. So we try to do, trying to get better at doing short and sweet messages through social media, short 1 and 2 minute video clips, and then apparently podcasting is where we need to go. We recently did a survey about how people take in information, and podcast rank at the top. So maybe we're going to be on podcast soon.
That's so interesting. I have a couple of mange related questions that any of you or multiple people can take. Is there any research for a preventive drug for mange like we have for flea and tick for dogs? And do you have to decontaminate an area after a bear with mange has been held there? And if so, how do you do that?
Well, I guess I'll drop in on that one since that really relates to our work. Preventative is not a practical issue because you just can't get to all the wild bears. I know there are some folks that if they find a mangy bear or a mangy fox in their yard, they'll go to the local pet store and they'll buy an ivermectin dose and put it in a bait and try to do something for that animal. That's really an unsafe and an unsound practice. When we have them in captivity, absolutely. We keep them in concrete structures when they have mange. And when the animals have been moved on, we actually use a flamethrower. We use propane flame to disinfect the area, be sure that all the mites have been killed. And it's a very, very methodical process because it is such a highly contagious disease. And these parasites are so resilient.
Wow. Thank you, Ed, for taking that question. There are two terms that I've learned from Katie and Rolf: habituated and food conditioned. And some of our attendees have asked for clarification on what those two terms mean. Are they interchangeable? Are they different? If one of you could tackle that, I think it would help us as a takeaway.
I'll tag Katie on that one.
And I was going to tag you, Rolf.
All right, that's fine. Whatever.
No, so a little bit different between food conditioned and habituated. So a food conditioned bear is just a bear that has learned how to get a food reward. So they have learned that, okay, I can come around the campground, there's easy food there to get, and they will come around those areas. Habituated has now lost that fear of people. So a bear that has become habituated to people now realizes, okay, there's no harm, nothing's going to happen to me if I'm around folks. And so a food conditioned bear is obviously a problem. We don't want bears to start learning where easy food is, but it's once they become habituated and lose that natural fear they have of people that's when it starts to become a problem. So food conditioned on its own is not always terrible, but one that becomes habituated and really learns that, oh, I can get these easy rewards around people and no bad things happen. That's what we want to prevent. So, and obviously prevention is better than once they start learning those rewards because they're very smart and know where to come back to.
Yeah, and I would jump in and just say that when people think they're doing something by quote unquote rescuing a bear cub, taking it into their home, which is illegal on the first minute they bring it home, it does not take that young animal very, very long to become irreparably habituated. And after as short a time as a week or so in captivity, those little bears learn things that will eventually cause them to die. When we save them at the Wildlife Center, if they demonstrate those habituated behaviors, even if the animal is otherwise healthy and resilient, we cannot and will not release them to the wild.
Thanks, guys. I think we have time for one more question. We're bringing our friend the grizzly bear in here. One of our listeners asked if grizzly bears and black bear territories overlap in the northern U.S. And if so, how do those two populations interact? Anyone want to tackle that one?
Go for it, Katie.
They do. So out west or in places like British Columbia and Canada, you can find black bears and grizzly bears overlap in ranges together. So they actually have a little bit different diet composition. So grizzly bears eat a little bit more meat. Their claws are a little bit different. If you've ever seen a grizzly bear's claws, they have these really long claws that are not great for climbing, but they're great for getting under things, digging out, finding food sources. So they live in the same areas. Of course, not in Virginia. We do not have any grizzly bears in Virginia. We'll just clarify. But yes, out west or up north, you can have grizzlies and black bears overlapping in the same area. Probably a little bit of competition at times, especially in a year like if you had a lean food year, things could probably get a little bit territorial.
And black bears typically will try to avoid grizzly bears.
Yes. Grizzly bears are
As
much
well.
As should we all.
Yeah.
Well, we could keep going, guys. I have more questions, but we've reached 7:33. So I want to say thank you to the three of you for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us tonight. And I want to thank everybody who hung on even through the technical difficulties and listened to this wonderful program. I just want to remind you that it's been recorded and we will be sending it out to everybody who registered. And that should be ready sometime next week. And if you enjoyed this virtual offering, we have another one coming up on April 20th about safeguarding Shenandoah's native brook trout. And it will talk about the programs that the Trust is funding in the park on this topic. So do keep your eyes and ears out for that invitation. And we just thank you for supporting our work, and please support these wonderful organizations that have been here tonight. And thanks so much for being here, everybody.